I stared at the invitation in my hands, feeling the weight of its implications. The thick, cream-colored paper with gold embossing screamed luxury, a world I'd never quite felt comfortable in despite being married to Michael for 3 years now. My fingers traced the elegant script that spelled out our names, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Blackwood. Even seeing my name associated with his family still felt strange sometimes. "Beth, are you ready?" Michael's voice echoed from downstairs, a hint of impatience coloring his tone. I sighed, giving myself one last look in the mirror. The dress I wore was my own design, simple, yet elegant. A deep blue that brought out the color of my eyes, with delicate beadwork I'd painstakingly added by hand. It wasn't a designer label, but it was me. "Coming," I called back, grabbing my small clutch and heading downstairs. Michael was waiting by the door, looking dashing in his tailored suit. His eyes softened when he saw me, a small smile playing on his lips. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I felt a flutter in my stomach, the same one I'd felt when we first met. It was moments like these that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him, despite the complications that came with his family. As we stepped outside, I saw the sleek black car waiting for us. Gerald, Michael's father, was in the driver's seat, with Vivian, his mother, beside him. My stomach tightened. I'd hoped we'd be driving separately, but of course, they'd insist on us all arriving together. Presentation was everything to the Blackwoods. "There you are," Vivian said as we slid into the back seat. Her voice was honey-sweet, but I could detect the underlying tension. I was beginning to worry we'd be late. I glanced at my watch. We were still 45 minutes early for our reservation. "Sorry to keep you waiting," I said, trying to keep my tone light. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. Vivian's eyes swept over my dress, and I saw the slight narrowing of her gaze. "Well, you certainly put in an effort, dear." I felt Michael stiffen beside me but, as usual, he said nothing. I squeezed his hand, partly for support, partly to keep myself from saying something I'd regret. As Gerald navigated the busy New York streets, I found myself lost in thought, remembering the first time I'd met Michael's parents. It had been at a charity gala, and I'd been so nervous I could hardly speak. They'd been polite, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Who was this girl their son had brought? Where did she come from? What did she do? When they found out I was an artist, a painter who also designed clothes as a side gig, I saw the disappointment flash across their faces. It wasn't the career they'd envisioned for their son's partner. They'd probably imagined a lawyer, or maybe a doctor. Someone from their world. "So, Beth," Gerald's voice broke through my reverie. "How's your art going? Sold any paintings lately?" I could hear the skepticism in his voice, the implication that my work couldn't possibly be profitable. "Actually, yes," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I just sold a piece to a gallery in Soho last week." "Oh, how quaint," Vivian chimed in. "It must be so fun to have a little hobby like that." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that rising to their bait would only make things worse. Michael gave my hand another squeeze, but remained silent. Sometimes, his silence hurt more than his parents' words. As we pulled up to the restaurant, I couldn't help but gasp. The Gilded Leaf was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, known for its Michelin-starred chef and month-long waiting list. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a red carpet leading to the entrance, where a valet was already waiting to take our car. "Impressive, isn't it?" Vivian said, a note of pride in her voice. "Gerald's company has a standing reservation here. It's where all the important deals are made." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we walked in, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The other diners were dripping in designer labels and expensive jewelry. I unconsciously touched the simple silver necklace at my throat, a gift from my grandmother. The maître d' greeted us warmly, obviously recognizing Gerald and Vivian. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, always a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." As we were led through the restaurant, I could feel eyes on us. Or maybe it was just my paranoia. I tried to stand a little straighter, to look like I belonged here. Michael's hand on the small of my back was reassuring, but I wished he'd do more to make me feel included. Our table was in a prime location, overlooking the twinkling lights of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. As we settled in, a waiter appeared almost instantly with a bottle of champagne. "To family," Gerald said as our glasses were filled, raising his in a toast. The word felt hollow, but I raised my glass anyway, taking a small sip of the bubbly liquid. As we perused the menus, thick, leather-bound affairs with gold lettering, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the prices. A single appetizer cost more than I usually spent on groceries for a week. "Order whatever you'd like, Beth," Michael said softly, noticing my hesitation. "It's a special occasion." I smiled at him gratefully, but I could see Vivian's lips purse at his words. "Yes, Beth," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Don't hold back on our account. Though I'm sure the offerings here might be a bit sophisticated for your tastes." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, "I've always wanted to try their truffle risotto. I've heard it's amazing." Vivian looked taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered. "Oh, of course. How adventurous of you." As the waiter took our orders, I couldn't help but notice how deferential he was, especially to Gerald. It was clear that the Blackwoods were regulars here, treated with the utmost respect. Part of me wondered what that must be like, to move through the world with such confidence, such assurance of your place in it. The conversation over dinner was stilted, filled with subtle digs and backhanded compliments. Vivian asked about my family, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor by showing interest. "And what does your father do again, Beth?" "I can't quite recall." I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt and anger that always surfaced when my family was brought up. "He was a high school teacher," I said quietly. "He passed away when I was in college." "Oh, that's right," Vivian said, not sounding sorry at all. "How unfortunate. Though I suppose it must have been difficult for him to provide for your family on a teacher's salary." I felt Michael tense beside me, and for a moment, I thought he might actually say something. But he just took another sip of his wine, leaving me to fend for myself as usual. "My father was an excellent provider," I said, my voice low but firm. "He taught me the value of hard work and creativity. His lessons are a big part of why I'm successful in my art today." Gerald chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Successful is a relative term, my dear. I'm sure your little paintings are charming, but let's not confuse hobby with career." I felt something snap inside me. All the pent-up frustration, all the times I'd bit my tongue, it all came bubbling to the surface. I opened my mouth, ready to tell them exactly what I thought of their condescension and narrow-mindedness. But before I could speak, the waiter appeared with our main courses. The moment passed, the words I wanted to say dying on my lips. As we ate, I found myself retreating inward, responding to their conversation with monosyllabic answers. Michael noticed, of course. He always noticed when I was upset, even if he rarely did anything about it. As his parents launched into a story about their recent trip to the Maldives, he leaned in close to me. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I turned to look at him, really look at him. I saw the concern in his eyes, the love that I knew was there. But I also saw the hesitation, the fear of standing up to his parents. And in that moment, I realized something had to change. "No," I said quietly, but firmly. "No, I'm not okay." Michael's eyes widened, and I could see him struggling with what to do. But before he could respond, Vivian's voice cut through our private moment. "Beth, dear, you've hardly touched your food. Is something wrong with it? I'm sure we could have the chef prepare something more suitable for you." I looked down at my plate, at the exquisitely prepared risotto that I'd been too upset to eat. Then I looked back up at Vivian, at her perfectly coiffed hair and expertly applied makeup. At the woman who had been belittling me, my family, and my choices since the day I entered her son's life. And I made a decision. "Actually, Vivian," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart, "I think there is something wrong. But it's not with the food." The table fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the tension thick in the air. But for the first time since this dinner began, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was time to stand up for myself. It was time for things to change. The silence that followed my words was deafening. I could see the shock on Vivian's face, the tightening of Gerald's jaw, and the mixture of surprise and worry in Michael's eyes. For a moment, I almost backed down, almost apologized and retreated into the shell of politeness I'd hidden in for so long. But something had changed inside me. I was tired of being the punching bag, tired of having my worth questioned at every turn. "Beth," Michael said, his voice low and cautious, "maybe this isn't the best time." I cut him off with a look. "If not now, when?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "How many more dinners do we sit through where your parents belittle me and my choices?" Vivian's face flushed red, a mix of anger and embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice clipped. "We've only ever tried to welcome you into our family." I couldn't help but let out a small, bitter laugh. "Welcome me? By constantly reminding me that I don't belong? By treating my career as a joke?" Gerald leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Now listen here, young lady — but I wasn't finished. Years of pent-up frustration were pouring out of me, and I couldn't have stopped if I wanted to. No, you listen. I have sat here dinner after dinner, event after event, biting my tongue and taking your snide comments. I've watched you dismiss my work, my family, everything that makes me who I am. And I'm done." The waiter approached our table, likely drawn by the rising volume of our conversation. He hesitated, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. Gerald waved him away impatiently, his eyes never leaving my face. "If this is how you truly feel," Vivian said, her voice ice cold, "perhaps it would be best if you left." I felt a flicker of hurt at her words, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of liberation. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're right," I said. "I should leave. But not because you want me to. Because I deserve better than this." I turned to Michael, who was staring at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "Are you coming?" I asked, holding out my hand. He looked at me, then at his parents, indecision written all over his face. My heart sank as I realized he wasn't going to stand up to them, not even now. "Michael," I said softly, "if you can't support me now, then when?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Beth, they're my parents. We can't just " I nodded, a sad smile on my face. "I understand. But I can't do this anymore. I won't." With that, I turned and walked away from the table, my head held high despite the tears threatening to spill from my eyes. I could feel the stares of other diners, could hear the whispers starting to circulate. But for once, I didn't care what anyone thought. As I reached the entrance of the restaurant, I heard footsteps behind me. For a moment, my heart leapt, thinking it might be Michael. But when I turned, I saw it was the maître d', looking concerned. "Is everything all right, madam?" he asked, his voice low and discreet. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Yes, thank you. I'm just leaving a bit earlier than expected." He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "Shall I call you a cab?" I was about to say yes when a thought struck me. A memory of something I'd been keeping secret for years, something that could change everything. "Actually," I said, my voice gaining strength, "could you please ask Mr. Calloway to come see me? He should know who I am." The maître d' looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, madam. If you'll just wait here a moment." As he hurried off, I leaned against the wall, my mind racing. I hadn't planned on revealing this part of my past, had hoped I'd never need to. But tonight had changed everything. It was time to stop hiding, time to show the Blackwoods exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. A few minutes later, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s approached me, his face a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice low. "I'm Thomas Calloway, the manager. How can I assist you?" I straightened up, meeting his gaze. "Mr. Calloway, I believe you knew my uncle, William Harper." Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed quickly by a look of dawning realization. "Of course," he said, his tone suddenly much more deferential. "Mr. Harper was one of our most valued patrons. When he passed, we were told his niece had inherited his interests. But we were never introduced." I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. I preferred to keep a low profile. But tonight, I find myself in need of your assistance. Mr. Calloway nodded eagerly. Anything, Miss Harper. What can I do for you? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I'm dining with the Blackwood family tonight. I believe you know them? Of course, he said, a hint of distaste crossing his face before he could hide it. They're frequent patrons. Indeed, I said. Well, Mr. Calloway, I think it's time they learned exactly who I am. And I'd like your help in doing so. As I explained my plan to Mr. Calloway, I could see a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. When I finished, he nodded solemnly. It would be my pleasure, Miss Harper. Shall we? Taking another deep breath, I nodded. Yes, let's. As we walked back into the dining room, I could feel the eyes of other diners on us. The Blackwoods' table came into view, and I could see Michael in heated conversation with his parents, his face flushed with emotion. They all looked up as we approached, confusion evident on their faces. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat, his voice carrying clearly through the now quiet restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I have an important announcement to make. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to us. I could see the panic on Vivian's face, the anger on Gerald's, and the utter bewilderment on Michael's. It is my great honor, Mr. Calloway continued, to introduce Miss Elizabeth Harper, niece of the late William Harper and majority stakeholder of the Gilded Leaf, as well as several other establishments in our restaurant group. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the gears turning in everyone's heads as they processed this information. Vivian's mouth hung open in shock, while Gerald's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Michael was the first to speak. Beth, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, what's going on? I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. What's going on, Michael, is that I'm done hiding who I am. When my uncle died, he left me his business interests. I chose not to take an active role, to live my life on my own terms. But I never stopped being his heir. I turned to Vivian and Gerald, who were still staring at me in disbelief. All this time, I said, my voice gaining strength, you've looked down on me, treated me like I was beneath you. But the truth is, I could have bought and sold your company 10 times over. Gerald sputtered, finally finding his voice. This is preposterous. You expect us to believe it's true, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Calloway interrupted smoothly. Miss Harper's uncle was one of our most valued investors. She inherited everything upon his passing. The look on Gerald's face was almost comical as he realized the implications of what he was hearing. Vivian had gone pale, her hands shaking as she reached for her wine glass. I turned back to Michael, who was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. I'm sorry I kept this from you, I said softly. I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for my family's money. But I can see now that was a mistake. I should have been honest from the start. Michael shook his head, still struggling to process everything. I don't understand. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because it shouldn't have mattered, I replied, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders as I finally spoke my truth. My worth isn't in my bank account or my family name. It's in who I am, what I create, how I treat others. And if you and your family couldn't see that without knowing about my inheritance, then maybe we were never meant to be. I took a step back, looking at each of them in turn. I came here tonight hoping to finally bridge the gap between us. But I can see now that's not possible. Not as long as you value status over character. With that, I turned to Mr. Calloway. Thank you for your assistance. I trust you'll ensure the Blackwoods' meal is on the house tonight. Consider it a parting gift. As I walked away from the table for the second time that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The secrets I'd been carrying, the constant need to prove myself, it all fell away with each step. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped out of the restaurant, and I took a deep breath, feeling like I could finally breathe again. As I hailed a cab, I heard the restaurant door open behind me. I turned, half expecting to see Michael, but instead, it was Mr. Calloway. Miss Harper, he said, a hint of admiration in his voice, that was quite a scene. Are you sure you're all right? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I'm more than all right, Mr. Calloway. I'm free. As the cab pulled up, I turned back to him. I think it's time I took a more active role in my uncle's businesses. Expect a call from me soon. With that, I climbed into the cab, ready to face whatever came next. The old Beth, the one who hid and apologized for her existence, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to show it. And that woman? She was ready to take on the world. As the cab pulled away from the Gilded Leaf, I felt a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Relief, exhilaration, and a touch of fear all swirled together in my chest. The city lights blurred past the window, and I found myself lost in thought, memories of my past bubbling to the surface. I remembered the day my Uncle William had called me into his study. It was just after my college graduation, and I'd been so excited to start my career as an artist. But the somber look on his face had instantly sobered my mood. "Beth," he'd said, his voice gravelly with age and years of cigar smoke, "there's something I need to tell you." What followed was a revelation that had turned my world upside down. Uncle William, it turned out, wasn't just the eccentric relative who'd always supported my artistic endeavors. He was a business mogul, with fingers in pies across New York City and beyond. Restaurants, hotels, art galleries, his empire was vast and varied. And he was dying. "I'm leaving it all to you, kiddo," he'd said, a sad smile on his face. "You're the only one I trust to do right by it." I'd been stunned, overwhelmed by the responsibility he was placing on my shoulders. "But Uncle Will," I'd protested, "I don't know the first thing about running a business. I'm an artist, not a CEO." He'd chuckled at that, a warm sound that had always made me feel safe. "That's exactly why I'm choosing you, Beth. You've got heart, and you've got integrity. The rest, you can learn." In the weeks that followed, as Uncle William's health declined, he'd introduced me to key people in his organization. Thomas Calloway at the Gilded Leaf had been one of them. They'd all looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, this young artist suddenly thrust into their world. When Uncle William passed, I'd been left with a choice. I could step into the role he'd prepared for me, become the head of a business empire at the age of 23. Or I could forge my own path. In the end, I'd chosen a middle ground. I retained ownership of the businesses but appointed trusted managers to run the day-to-day operations. I used some of the income to fund my art, donating the rest to charities Uncle William had supported. And I kept my inheritance a secret, wanting to make my own way in the world without the weight of expectations that came with such wealth. The cab came to a stop, jolting me out of my reverie. I realized we'd arrived at my apartment building. As I paid the driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk, I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over me. The events of the evening had taken more out of me than I'd realized. I made my way up to my apartment, a modest two-bedroom that I'd decorated with my own artwork and flea market finds. As I closed the door behind me, the silence of the space enveloped me. For the first time since leaving the restaurant, I allowed myself to really feel the weight of what had just happened. I'd revealed my secret. After years of hiding, of downplaying my connection to Uncle William's empire, I'd laid it all out in the open. And not just to anyone, to the Blackwoods, to Michael. The thought of Michael sent a pang through my chest. What was he thinking right now? Did he feel betrayed? Angry? Or was he, like his parents, simply shocked by the revelation of my true status? My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out to see a flood of missed calls and messages. Most were from Michael, but there were a few from numbers I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before turning the phone off completely. Whatever fallout was coming, it could wait until morning. I made my way to the bathroom, intent on washing away the remnants of the evening. As I stood under the hot spray of the shower, I found myself replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over in my mind. The look of shock on Vivian's face, the disbelief in Gerald's eyes, the way Mr. Calloway had so seamlessly backed up my claims. It all felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than my actual life. As I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a fluffy towel, a thought struck me. What would Uncle William think of what I'd done? Would he be proud that I'd finally embraced my inheritance? or disappointed that I'd used it as a weapon, even if it was in self-defense. I padded into my bedroom, slipping on my most comfortable pajamas. As I did, my eyes fell on a photo on my nightstand. It was of Uncle William and me at my college graduation. His arm was around my shoulders, and we were both beaming at the camera. I picked up the frame, tracing my finger over his familiar features. "I hope I did the right thing, Uncle Will," I whispered to the photo. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of what the next day might bring. Would the story of my outburst at the Gilded Leaf make its way through New York's elite circles? Would I wake up to find my name splashed across the society pages? When my alarm went off the next morning, I felt like I'd barely slept at all. I reached for my phone out of habit before remembering I'd turned it off. With a sigh, I forced myself out of bed. Whatever was waiting for me, I couldn't hide from it forever. As I made my way to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee, I heard a knock at my door. My heart leapt into my throat. Who could it be? Michael? His parents? A horde of reporters eager for the latest society scandal? Taking a deep breath to steel myself, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. To my surprise, I saw Mr. Calloway standing in the hallway, looking as impeccably dressed as always despite the early hour. I opened the door, confusion evident on my face. "Mr. Calloway? What are you doing here?" He gave me a small, respectful nod. "Good morning, Miss Harper. I hope I'm not intruding, but after last night's events, I thought it prudent to touch base with you as soon as possible." I stepped back, gesturing for him to come in. "Of course, please, come in. I was just about to make some coffee. Would you like some?" "That would be lovely, thank you," he said, following me into the apartment. As I busied myself with the coffee maker, Mr. Calloway took a seat at my small kitchen table. There was a moment of awkward silence before he spoke again. "Miss Harper, I want you to know that your secret is safe with me and the staff at the Gilded Leaf. We've always respected your uncle's wishes for discretion, and that hasn't changed." I turned to face him, a wave of relief washing over me. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I appreciate that more than you know." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "Your uncle was a good man, and a fair boss. We've all been curious about you over the years, wondering when or if you'd step into his shoes." I brought 2 mugs of coffee to the table, sliding one towards him before taking a seat myself. To be honest, I'm not sure what my next move is. Last night wasn't planned. Mr. Calloway took a sip of his coffee before responding. "If I may be so bold, Miss Harper, I think it might be time for you to take a more active role in your businesses." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Oh, and why is that?" He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Because I've seen how you handled yourself last night. You showed grace under pressure, and a strength of character that, frankly, we could use more of in this industry." His words touched something in me, a part of myself I'd been trying to ignore for years. The part that had always wondered what if I had stepped up when Uncle William died? What if I had embraced this legacy instead of hiding from it? "I don't know the first thing about running a restaurant, let alone an entire business empire," I said, voicing the fear that had held me back for so long. Mr. Calloway's response was immediate and confident. "You can learn. Your uncle believed in you, and after last night, so do I." I sat back in my chair, my mind whirling with possibilities. Could I do it? Could I step into this role and make a difference? I thought about the Blackwoods, about all the people like them who looked down on those they deemed beneath them. What if I could use this position to change things? "Mr. Calloway," I said slowly, a plan starting to form in my mind, "I think it's time we called a board meeting. There are some changes I'd like to discuss." The smile that spread across Mr. Calloway's face was one of genuine pleasure. "I was hoping you'd say that, Miss Harper. Shall I make the arrangements?" I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Yes, please do. And Mr. Calloway, thank you for everything." As he left my apartment a short while later, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead was uncertain, full of challenges I wasn't sure I was prepared for. But for the first time since Uncle William's death, I felt like I was truly honoring his legacy. I picked up my phone, finally ready to face whatever messages awaited me. As I turned it on, I made a silent promise to myself and to the memory of Uncle William. I would no longer hide who I was or what I was capable of. It was time to step into the light and make a difference. The phone buzzed to life, notifications flooding the screen. But I was ready. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on. Beth Harper, the artist, the heiress, the woman who was finally ready to embrace all parts of herself, was stepping onto the stage. And New York City had better be ready. The next evening, I found myself standing once again at the entrance of the Gilded Leaf. This time, however, everything felt different. The doorman's eyes widened in recognition as I approached, and he hurried to open the door for me. "Good evening, Miss Harper," he said, his tone filled with a respect I'd never heard before. "Mr. Calloway is expecting you." I nodded, offering him a small smile as I stepped inside. The restaurant was bustling, filled with the city's elite enjoying their expensive meals and even more expensive wines. As I made my way through the dining room, I could feel eyes following me. Word had clearly spread about last night's events. Mr. Calloway met me halfway, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming. Everything is prepared as you requested." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Are they here?" He nodded, his expression turning serious. "Yes, the Blackwoods arrived about 20 minutes ago. They're at their usual table." I couldn't help but let out a small, bitter laugh. Of course they were at their usual table. Some things never changed. As we approached the Blackwoods table, I could see the tension in their postures. Vivian was gripping her wine glass so tightly I feared it might shatter, while Gerald's face was set in a stony mask. Michael, sandwiched between his parents, looked absolutely miserable. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat, causing all three Blackwoods to look up. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Michael, may I present Miss Elizabeth Harper, owner of the Gilded Leaf and several other establishments in our restaurant group." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they struggled to reconcile the Beth they thought they knew with the woman standing before them now. Vivian was the first to break the silence, her voice strained as she attempted to maintain her usual air of superiority. "Beth, dear, what a surprise to see you here again." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Is it really, Vivian? I would think after last night's revelation, my presence here shouldn't be surprising at all." Gerald cleared his throat, his business instincts clearly kicking in. "Beth, perhaps we could discuss this in private. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement." I raised an eyebrow at him. "An arrangement, Gerald? And what exactly did you have in mind?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, we all said things last night that we didn't mean. Why don't we start fresh? With your connections and our experience, we could do great things together." I felt a flash of anger at his words. Even now, he was trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. I turned to Mr. Calloway, who had been standing quietly beside me. "Mr. Calloway, would you mind sharing with the Blackwoods exactly how long my family has owned the Gilded Leaf?" Mr. Calloway nodded, his voice carrying clearly through the now hushed restaurant. "Of course, Miss Harper. The Harper family has been the majority stakeholder in the Gilded Leaf for over 50 years. Your uncle, Mr. William Harper, took over operations in the 1980s and transformed it into the establishment it is today." I watched as the color drained from Gerald's face. 50 years. Long before the Blackwoods had ever set foot in this restaurant, my family had owned it. The realization seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Michael, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Beth, I don't understand. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I turned to him, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Would it have made a difference, Michael? Would knowing about my family's wealth have changed how you saw me? How you let your parents treat me?" He flinched at my words, and I saw a flicker of shame cross his face. "I never meant to. I didn't know." "That's just it, Michael," I said, my voice softening slightly. "You didn't know because you never asked. You never stood up for me, Never tried to see beyond what your parents told you about me. Vivian, seemingly unable to contain herself any longer, burst out, "This is preposterous. You can't just come in here and start making accusations. We've been loyal patrons of this establishment for years." I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. "Loyal patrons? Is that what you call it, Vivian? Throwing your weight around, treating the staff like they're beneath you, using this place as your personal playground to show off your supposed status?" She recoiled as if I'd slapped her, and I saw several nearby diners nod in agreement with my words. It seemed the Blackwoods' behavior hadn't gone unnoticed by others. I took a deep breath, centering myself before continuing. "Things are going to change around here. The Gilded Leaf has always been about excellence in cuisine and service, not about catering to the whims of those who think their money puts them above others." Gerald, seemingly regaining some of his composure, leaned forward with a sneer. "And who exactly is going to implement these changes?" "You. A girl who's been playing at being an artist while hiding behind her uncle's money?" I felt a surge of anger at his words, but before I could respond, I heard a voice from behind me. "I believe that would be me, Mr. Blackwood." I turned to see Chef Maria Santiago, the Gilded Leaf's head chef and one of the most respected culinary artists in the city. She stepped up beside me, her chef's whites immaculate, her presence commanding respect. "Miss Harper has asked me to take on the role of executive chef and operations manager," Chef Santiago continued, her voice steady and confident. "And I've accepted." The look of shock on Gerald's face was almost comical. Chef Santiago was a legend in the culinary world, someone even he wouldn't dare disrespect openly. I nodded at Chef Santiago, grateful for her support. Chef Santiago will be overseeing all aspects of the Gilded Leaf's operations moving forward. This includes our new policy on respect and equal treatment for all our patrons and staff. I turned back to the Blackwoods, my voice firm. "You're welcome to continue dining here, but things will be different. There will be no more special treatment, no more looking down on the staff or other patrons. You'll be treated with the same respect we show all our customers, no more, no less." Vivian looked like she was about to protest, but Gerald put a hand on her arm, silencing her. He seemed to realize that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Michael stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Beth, can we talk? Privately?" I hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, Michael. Let's step outside." As we made our way to the restaurant's entrance, I could feel the eyes of every patron following us. The whispers had already started, and I knew by tomorrow, this story would be all over the city's elite circles. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief from the tension inside. Michael turned to me, his face a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Beth, I'm sorry," he began, his voice quiet. "I had no idea about your family, about any of this. But that's not an excuse. I should have stood up for you, should have seen how my parents were treating you." I felt a lump form in my throat. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to fall back into the comfort of our relationship. But I knew too much had changed. "Michael," I said gently, "your apology means a lot to me. But this isn't just about your parents or about my inheritance. It's about who we are as people. You've shown me who you are when things get tough, when standing up for what's right means going against your family." He flinched at my words but didn't argue. Deep down, I think he knew I was right. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Now, we go our separate ways. I have a legacy to honor and a business to run. And you have some soul-searching to do." Michael nodded, a look of resignation on his face. He leaned in and kissed me softly on the cheek. "Goodbye, Beth. I truly am sorry." As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. A chapter of my life was closing, but another, more exciting one was just beginning. I turned back to the restaurant, squaring my shoulders. Through the windows, I could see Mr. Calloway and Chef Santiago waiting for me, ready to start implementing the changes we'd discussed. As I stepped back inside, I felt a surge of determination. The Gilded Leaf was about to enter a new era, and I was ready to lead the way. The Beth who had hidden in the shadows, afraid to claim her birthright, was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to make her mark on the world, one dinner service at a time. As I re-entered the Gilded Leaf, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. The usual buzz of conversation had been replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery against fine china. All eyes seemed to be on me as I made my way back to the Blackwoods table, where Vivian and Gerald sat, looking like they'd just bitten into something particularly sour. Mr. Calloway fell into step beside me, his voice low. "Miss Harper, are you sure about this? It's not too late to handle this more discreetly." I appreciated his concern, but I knew this was a moment that required a public stand. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway, but this needs to be done. For too long, people like the Blackwoods have gotten away with treating others as beneath them. It's time for that to change." He nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "As you wish, Miss Harper." As we approached the table, I could see Gerald whispering furiously to Vivian, who looked like she was on the verge of tears. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt at their obvious distress, but I quickly pushed it aside. They had brought this on themselves with years of condescension and cruelty. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed restaurant. "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Gerald stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Now see here, young lady. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this ends now. We are leaving, and you can be sure that our lawyers will be in touch." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound sharp and humorless. "Your lawyers, Gerald? And what exactly do you think they can do? Sue me for owning my own restaurant? For finally standing up to your bullying?" Vivian joined her husband, her voice shrill. "How dare you speak to us like this? Do you have any idea who we are?" "Oh, I know exactly who you are," I replied, my voice level but filled with steel. "You're the people who have spent years looking down on me, on the staff here, on anyone you deemed beneath your precious social status. But that ends today." I turned to Mr. Calloway. "Mr. Calloway, would you please remind the Blackwoods of our new policy regarding respect and equal treatment?" Mr. Calloway stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Certainly, Miss Harper. As of today, the Gilded Leaf has instituted a strict policy of mutual respect between all patrons and staff. Any form of discriminatory or abusive behavior will result in immediate removal from the premises and a permanent ban from all Harper Group establishments." The color drained from Gerald's face as the implications of Mr. Calloway's words sank in. A ban from the Gilded Leaf would be a significant blow to their social standing. "You can't do this," Gerald sputtered, his composure cracking. "We're your best customers." I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. "No, Gerald. You're not our best customers. Our best customers are the ones who treat our staff with respect, who come here for the food and the atmosphere, not to flaunt their wealth or status." I could see other diners nodding in agreement, and I heard a few murmurs of approval. It seemed the Blackwoods' behavior hadn't gone unnoticed by their peers. "Now," I continued, my voice firm, "you have a choice to make. You can either apologize for your past behavior and agree to abide by our new policies, or you can leave and not return. The choice is yours." For a moment, I thought Gerald might actually explode. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, and I could see a vein pulsing in his forehead. But then, something unexpected happened. Vivian, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her carefully applied makeup starting to run. "I'm so sorry. We never meant to hurt anyone. We thought." Her words trailed off as she collapsed back into her chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Gerald looked at his wife in shock, then back at me, his anger seeming to deflate like a punctured balloon. We, he stammered, clearly at a loss for words. I felt a surge of emotion, pity, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I was seeing the Blackwoods not as the intimidating figures they'd always been in my mind, but as flawed, vulnerable human beings. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," I said, my voice softening slightly, "I don't want your humiliation. I want your understanding. Can you see how your actions have affected others? Can you commit to treating everyone, regardless of their perceived status, with respect and dignity? Gerald looked at his wife, then back at me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, we can do that. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Then let's start fresh. Right here, right now. What happened next took everyone by surprise. Gerald Blackwood, the man who had looked down on me and countless others for years, slowly lowered himself to one knee. Vivian, after a moment's hesitation, joined him. A collective gasp went through the restaurant. I heard the click of a camera phone and inwardly groaned, knowing this moment would likely be all over social media within the hour. But I pushed that thought aside, focusing on the couple kneeling before me. We're sorry, Gerald said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. To you, Beth, to the staff here, to everyone we've ever treated poorly. We were wrong, and we're truly sorry. Vivian nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Please forgive us, she added, her voice choked with emotion. I stood there for a moment, looking down at the Blackwoods, proud, arrogant Gerald and perfectly polished Vivian on their knees in the middle of the Gilded Leaf. It was a surreal moment, one I never could have imagined when I first met them. Stand up, I said softly, extending my hands to help them to their feet. This isn't about humiliation. It's about growth and change. As they stood, I could see a mix of emotions on their faces, shame, relief, and something that looked almost like respect. Thank you for your apology, I said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I accept it, on behalf of myself and the staff here at the Gilded Leaf. Let this be a new beginning for all of us. I turned to the rest of the diners, who were watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. And to all of our patrons, let this serve as a reminder. The Gilded Leaf is a place of excellence not just in our food and service, but in how we treat each other. We welcome everyone who shares these values. There was a moment of silence, and then, to my surprise, applause broke out. It started softly but quickly grew, filling the restaurant with its sound. I saw nods of approval, raised glasses, and even a few tears. As the applause died down, I turned back to the Blackwoods. Now, why don't you sit down and enjoy your meal? I believe Chef Santiago has prepared something special tonight. They nodded, clearly still processing everything that had happened. As they took their seats, I saw Gerald reach across the table and take Vivian's hand, squeezing it gently. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. I stepped away from the table, feeling drained but strangely exhilarated. Mr. Calloway appeared at my side, a look of admiration on his face. That was quite something, Miss Harper, he said softly. Your uncle would have been proud. I felt a lump form in my throat at his words. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I hope so. As I made my way towards the kitchen to thank Chef Santiago and the rest of the staff, I couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past few days. I had started this week as Beth the artist, hiding in the shadows of her own legacy. Now, I was Beth Harper, owner of the Gilded Leaf, a woman who had found her voice and her power. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be challenges, both in running the business and in navigating the complex social world I had just appended. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, truly myself. As I pushed through the kitchen doors, greeted by the controlled chaos of a busy dinner service, I smiled to myself. This was where I belonged. Not hiding, not pretending, but standing tall and making a difference. The Gilded Leaf was entering a new era, and so was I. And I couldn't wait to see what the future held. The kitchen of the Gilded Leaf was a whirlwind of activity as I pushed through the swinging doors. The clanging of pots, the sizzle of pans, and the rapid-fire instructions from Chef Santiago created a symphony of organized chaos. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. This was the heart of the restaurant, the place where culinary magic happened, and now, it was my responsibility. Miss Harper, Chef Santiago's voice cut through the noise as she approached me, wiping her hands on her apron. I heard what happened out there. Are you all right? I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her concern. I'm fine, Chef. More than fine, actually. I think we've just turned a corner here at the Gilded Leaf. She smiled, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. I couldn't agree more. The staff is buzzing with the news. You've given them hope, you know. Hope that things can really change. Her words hit me harder than I expected. In the heat of the moment with the Blackwoods, I hadn't fully considered the impact my actions would have on the staff. These were the people who made the Gilded Leaf what it was, who had endured the condescension and mistreatment of patrons like the Blackwoods for years. "Chef," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that changes are coming. Real changes. No more tolerating disrespect from anyone, no matter how much money they have. And I want your input on how we can make things better for the staff." Chef Santiago's face lit up. "That's music to my ears, Miss Harper. I have a few ideas already, if you'd like to hear them." We spent the next hour in her small office off the kitchen, discussing everything from improved working conditions to a profit-sharing program for long-term employees. As we talked, I could feel the excitement building. This was what Uncle William had seen in me, I realized. Not just the ability to run a business, but the desire to make it a force for good. As our meeting wrapped up, I heard my phone buzz in my purse. I'd been ignoring it all evening, but now, in the relative calm of Chef Santiago's office, I felt ready to face whatever awaited me. I pulled out my phone to find a flood of missed calls and messages. Most were from Michael, but there were also several from unknown numbers, likely reporters who had already gotten wind of the evening's events. But it was a text from Mr. Calloway that caught my eye. "Miss Harper, when you have a moment, please come to the main dining room. There's something you need to see." Intrigued and a little apprehensive, I said goodbye to Chef Santiago and made my way back to the dining room. As I pushed through the doors, I was met with a sight that took my breath away. The room was full. Not just full, but buzzing with energy. Every table was occupied, and there was a line of people waiting at the entrance. Mr. Calloway hurried over to me, a broad smile on his face. "Miss Harper, word has spread about what happened here tonight. People are calling it a revolution in fine dining. We've had reservation requests pouring in for weeks in advance." I stood there, stunned. This was more than I could have ever imagined. "But how?" I managed to ask. "It's only been a couple of hours." Mr. Calloway chuckled. "Never underestimate the power of social media, Miss Harper. Someone recorded your confrontation with the Blackwoods and your speech afterwards. It's gone viral. People are calling you a champion of equality and respect in the service industry." I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: pride, excitement, and a touch of anxiety. This was all happening so fast. But as I looked around the room, seeing the smiles on the faces of the staff, the excited chatter of the patrons, I knew this was exactly what the Gilded Leaf needed. "Mr. Calloway," I said, a plan forming in my mind, "I think it's time we made an official statement. Can you arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning?" He nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Of course, Miss Harper. I'll take care of everything." As he walked away to make the arrangements, I found myself drawn to the bar. I needed a moment to process everything that had happened. The bartender, a young man named Alex who I'd often chatted with during my visits with Michael, gave me a warm smile as I approached. "The usual, Miss Harper? Or should I say, boss?" he asked with a wink. I couldn't help but laugh. "Just Beth is fine, Alex." And yes, the usual would be perfect. As he prepared my drink, a simple gin and tonic, I noticed a small group of patrons at the end of the bar, clearly discussing the evening's events. One of them, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, caught my eye and raised her glass in a silent toast. I nodded back, feeling a surge of emotion. This was real. This was happening. Alex set my drink in front of me, then hesitated for a moment. "Beth," he said, his voice low, "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you did tonight, standing up to the Blackwoods like that, it means a lot. To all of us." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Alex. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, working together to make the Gilded Leaf the best it can be. For everyone." He nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "Count me in. Whatever you need." As I sipped my drink, I felt my phone buzz again. It was Michael. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call. Beth, Michael's voice came through, sounding strained and tired. Can we talk? Please. I sighed, feeling the weight of our complicated history. Michael, I'm not sure there's anything left to say. Please, he said again, his voice breaking slightly. I know I messed up. I know I should have stood up for you long ago. But seeing you tonight, seeing how strong and amazing you are, it made me realize what I've been missing. What I've been ignoring. I want to make things right. I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of emotions wash over me. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to give our relationship another chance. But I knew that wasn't the right path. Not anymore. Michael, I said gently, I appreciate you saying that. But the truth is, we've both changed. I'm not the same person I was yesterday, and I don't think you are either. We need to move forward, separately. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I understand. I hope you know that I really do care about you, Beth. And I'm proud of you. For everything. Thank you, Michael, I said, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. I care about you too. But this is for the best. For both of us. As I ended the call, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of a chapter in my life, but the beginning of an exciting new one. I looked around the bustling restaurant, at the staff moving with newfound purpose, at the patrons enjoying their meals with genuine smiles on their faces. This was my legacy now. Not just a successful business, but a place where people were treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their status or wealth. As the night wound down and the last patrons left, I found myself standing in the middle of the empty dining room. The events of the past few days played through my mind like a movie: the disastrous dinner with the Blackwoods, the revelation of my true identity, the confrontation that had changed everything. Mr. Calloway approached me, a gentle smile on his face. It's been quite a night, Miss Harper. Are you ready to go home and get some rest? I shook my head, feeling a surge of energy. Not yet, Mr. Calloway. I think I'll stay a bit longer. There's still so much to do, so many plans to make. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Very well. Just remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. The Gilded Leaf has a bright future ahead, thanks to you. But it's okay to take a breath every now and then. As he left, I walked over to the large windows overlooking the city. New York was alive with lights, a testament to the countless stories unfolding within its borders. My story was just one of many, but tonight, it felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something important. I placed my hand on the cool glass, feeling the pulse of the city beyond. Well, Uncle Will, I whispered, I hope I've made you proud. This is just the beginning. As I turned back to face the restaurant, my restaurant, I felt a sense of purpose and determination unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The Gilded Leaf was entering a new era, and so was I. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on. Beth Harper, the artist who had hidden in the shadows, was gone. In her place stood Beth Harper, the owner of the Gilded Leaf, a woman ready to make her mark on the world. And I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring.